Animation Deliberation was a perfect podcast until the ad break hit. Two hosts and their guest hosts were issued a podcast and escaped into the space, searching for new homes on uninhabited networks. We crashed on stranded Panda, stranding us on an already overpopulated network. That's right, I've been talking this whole time. I'm the one hosting the podcast. My name's J Scotty. This is my show. Bollocks, I just dropped the podcast. Do you hear me? This is ridiculous. I hate ad breaks. They're annoying and inconvenient, but entirely necessary to support this show. I'll be back to sing the theme song right after this.
So good.
Sing along if you know the words. 1, 2, 3, it's time for Animation Deliberation. A conversation and a celebration of our favorite action animated series. Yeah. All right, folks, welcome to Animation Deliberation, the podcast that takes action, animation, and cartoons seriously, but not too seriously. Clearly, with that intro, I am your host, J Scotty St. Clair, and I'm excited to be joined by J Sisson, one of my co-hosts over at Multiverse News. Welcome to Animation Deliberation. Jay, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm so excited to be here. First-time guest on Animation Deliberation, long-time listener, first-time guest, and
Right on.
I'm excited to get into it and talk about Solar Opposites.
Yeah, making your debut. Appreciate you being here. And yeah, Solar Opposites is a show. The fourth season just came out on Hulu, but it is a show that I've been enjoying for a really long time and have been looking for an excuse to talk about and someone to talk about it with. And, you know, I love my co-host Zuhair, but he typically prioritizes anime over like adult comedy or humor related content. So, definitely appreciate you being on. And I guess before we get rocking and rolling, I'll kind of maybe have you kind of introduce yourself to our listeners that may not be as familiar with you and kind of like maybe give a background on your relationship with animation, maybe what that looked like when you were a kid and maybe how that's progressed now that you're an adult, and you can, whatever you want to say about Solar Opposites and that in relation to that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, I have followed animation in some form, probably off and on my entire life. I grew up with just a love for entertainment, and I was into cartoons very early, especially like Pokemon and stuff like that. Growing up, I was really into like Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, and just the idea of like universes and connectivity and just like carrying themes across multiple episodes. It just stuck with me really young. So as I grew up, I think I did sort of lose a little bit of the animation as I got a little bit older into middle school and high school, but I definitely rediscovered it again in my adult life and started watching. I always kind of off and on would watch like King of the Hill. Like I did follow King of the Hill for a long time, but have just kind of recently gotten into watching Futurama for the first time.
Nice.
Watching through Rick and Morty, like watching a lot of these shows that I've just been really into, and so it's been a cool thing for me to kind of evolve with, to watch animation evolve with me, right? To go from kind of kid shows and being into that at that age to then now being an adult, like finding humor and finding joy in more mature properties. It's been a cool trend for sure.
Sweet, yeah. So you and I have to be like, I'm surprised we've never really hashed this out, but I think we're like right around the same age. You might be like slightly older than me. When did you graduate high school?
I graduated in 2007. I'm 34.
Okay. So I suspected you might just be a little bit older than me. I graduated in 2008. But yeah, all those properties you bring up, the Power Rangers, the Ninja Turtles, like I had a feeling we were, had similar exposure in terms to like the shows we were watching when we were growing up. So I relate to a lot of what you brought up there. And you mentioned Futurama, and that's a show that I've been able to cover in like snippets here, but we're not here to talk about Futurama. We're here to talk about Solar Opposites. But I do want to compare this show favorably to like Futurama. I think it's kind of in the same tradition as Futurama, as well as American Dad, where there are these shows that are kind of like second attempts or like spiritual successors to already very well received and very successful adult comedy series, like the Futurama being a spinoff of The Simpsons, and then American Dad kind of spinning off of Family Guy. And I think and then Solar Opposites here being like a second outing from Justin Roiland with Rick and Morty there. But for me, the trend between these three series is that I find myself liking these second attempts more. Like they might have a little bit of a
Yeah.
rockier start, and they might have to do a little bit more to sell me and get me on board. But I just think in terms of like character development and the story arcs that they decide to tackle, like I always find myself resonating with those second series more.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that.
Yeah.
I have found myself multiple times throughout the 4-season run of Solar Opposites because naturally you're going to compare it to Rick and Morty. It is so
Oh,
similar,
sure.
and
Yeah.
the Justin Roiland connection and all of that. Like I remember whenever I first started watching it, it was really hard for me to get over Corvo because he sounded so much like Rick, and I was
Sure.
like, I don't know if I can do this, like because I
Yeah.
just can't like separate these two things. So there's always going to be that connective tissue, and you're
Sure.
always going to be comparing them. But I've definitely found myself throughout the 4-season run thinking like this is better than Rick and Morty, like having those moments where it's
Sure.
just and then I'll go back and forth, and naturally you don't have to take them and be like one's better than the other, but just naturally my brain is going to do that. So
Yeah.
I think as a product, I don't know if I'm ready to call it better than Rick and Morty, but I think it's right there with it if it's not.
Okay.
I mean, I think like it's some of I would take its best episodes and put them up against Rick and Morty's best episodes for sure.
Okay. So you brought up a couple of things there, and so first of all, you talked about like Corvo's voice and how much Justin Roiland sounded like he was doing his voice for Rick. So with the fourth season, we obviously had a big change up with Dan Stevens stepping into the role. So I wanted to ask what your reception to that is. I mean, for me, it took a little bit of adjusting, but I kind of liked the way the show just hit it head on. It kind of reminded me of the Marvel Cinematic Universe when you've had recasting, like, Rhodey, specifically when Don Cheadle stepped in the role in Iron Man 2. He was just like, yeah, I'm here. It wasn't as meta as this show was about it. But so I kind of want to get your take on that. And then you also mentioned how like maybe stacking some of the best episodes of this show against some of the best episodes of Rick and Morty. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, do you have any episodes that come to mind when you say that?
Yeah. So the voice thing, I feel like you said, they did the thing that they had to do, which is they had to just attack it head on. You couldn't dancing around it and drawing it out more would have just made it worse. So it literally in the first scene, the voice changing Ray, which is like such a ridiculous thing to use, but it fits for the show and it makes total sense. Now, the voice itself, it is so different that at first it was jarring. I didn't.
Sure.
I'm used to just jumping on board with things. If somebody says, "Hey, this is this character now," I'm used to just being like, "Okay," and just kind of doing it.
Sure.
But definitely, while I was preparing, kind of mentally, like, "All right, this is going to be a different thing," it still did hit me. And I think it probably took maybe like 2 episodes before I finally really adapted to it. And I do feel like by the end, it was pretty seamless. I felt like the voice fit pretty well. It did not throw me off that much. The only time that it threw me off almost every time was the intro. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's just like that was burned into my mind as sounding a certain way.
Sure.
But it was like I never got used to that intro. It was almost every time I was like, this doesn't feel right, but then the episode would start and I would completely forget about it and it was fine. But it's just for some reason that intro just never clicked with me the right way.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people, it does seem the consensus online, it's hard to tell because I think a lot of people who watch the show are probably like us. They're like, all right, well, I like the show. I'm okay. This is a thing that happened and I'm just going to roll with it. But people who did not like this are very vocal about it online. It's been review bombed. It's like, Rotten Tomatoes. If you look at the critic score, it's pretty high. People like the season, but the audience score is incredibly low. Same with IMDb. It's been review bombed like crazy. So people are very angry about it. And it's all just like, shouldn't have recast. The voice is stupid. I hate the voice. So it is a sticking point. It's turned a lot of people off to the show, at least ones who are vocal. It's turned them off. But I do think to me, I don't feel like the show really missed a beat too much by jumping into it. As far as like favorite episodes, it's hard to pinpoint a favorite episode just because it's like hard to kind of get them all organized in my brain. But I do like a lot of the certain subplots. So like, I think the Goobler subplot is absolutely hysterical, and like I love that they hit it every season. Like I think that's such a hilarious and just like just a ridiculous thing that they've doubled and then tripled and quadrupled down on
Sure.
every season and
Yeah.
made more crazy. So I
Yeah.
love that. I love the idea of just like and I know we'll talk about it because it's a huge part of the season, but the stories
Sure.
within stories of Solar Opposites, they do it better than any other show that maybe I've seen.
Sure.
Just of like taking these three distinct storylines and really up until this point, it's really just been two of the Schlorpians and that whole thing, and then having the wall, and then adding this whole like silver cop thing to the whole thing.
Right.
To me, like, it's masterful the way that they cut it
Sure.
up and they stream these three conscious different storylines together.
Yeah.
To me, that's what makes the show great. It's like,
agreed.
hey, this guy that we don't like and he's a jerk and we accidentally shot him in the foot, we're going to shoot him into space. Most shows would just end it there. They'd be like, all right, we shot him into space. It's funny.
Sure.
It's a joke. It's over. But they're like, we're going to tell an entire story around launching this guy into space. He gets picked up by these silver cops. He has to go on, and like, we're still with it. And it's got some of the best like emotional beats of the show. So to me, it's just that's what makes this show so great to me. It's willingness to just be what it is, to just commit fully and run like through a brick wall into what it wants to be. Sure. And then just own it, and own every crazy thing that they come up with. Just double down on it and not try to be something it's not, but just lean into that sci-fi aspect really hard.
Yeah. No, I'm with you 100%. I want to backpedal a little bit to address some of the things you brought up. So kind of going back to Dan Stevens stepping into the role of Corvo, I agree with pretty much everything you brought up. And I think one of the things like that kind of stood out to me as well is I think it might have been in the first episode, maybe the second episode, but even as like I was still going through that adjustment period, like they made mention like, oh yeah, even when we do flashbacks, like this voice changing ray affects flashbacks now. So just like,
even Jesse was like, is he just going to sound like that now? Like, is that what he sounds like?
Yeah. Yeah. And then what you brought up about the intro, like I agree with you a lot because I really like that intro. Like it's one of those intros that I never skip. And that part of that maybe I don't think Hulu even brings up the option to skip the intro, but I still just enjoy it. But I think the improvisational nature that Justin Roiland brought to that, like it really feels like a first take. Like he has the where he doesn't know what word to use for space. And so you have Dan Stevens, who is like, hey, a classically trained theater actor that, cut his teeth on like shows like Downton Abbey and whatnot. And he's trying to recreate that. You could just kind of feel that he's like reading that. And I do, I like his inflection. He's doing the very angry vocalization there. But even like Corvo always has the last little bit at the end where he says something unique about society and observation. Yeah. And those always felt like they didn't feel as natural as they did when Justin Roiland was doing it. It's like, okay, somebody wrote this for him and he's doing his best to deliver it, but it just doesn't feel as organic.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then in terms of like the B stories that we get, I'm with you. The Wall has always been incredibly fascinating to me. It feels like it could be a show on its own. Like I recently watched the series Silo on Apple TV, which it's kind of crazy how much these two stories have in common in terms of like it being a dystopian society, like basically stuck underground or within this wall. And then, the introduction of the whole Silver Cops thing has been great. I think it was first introduced last season, season 3. And the Silver Cops are basically just take the Green Lanterns and the Silver Surfer and just mash them together. And there you go. You got the Silver Cops. So I kind of like that they're playing in column A and column B with Marvel and DC. And I didn't notice it when the character made his debut in season 3, but having watched the HBO show Succession in between these seasons, I noticed Kieran Culkin's voice immediately. Like he's voicing this guy Glenn, who's a total douche, and like his morals and his choices are based on the Fast and Furious franchise.
That's the thing. Like some of the concepts in the show, the show moves at like 100 miles an hour. Like the jokes and the pop culture references and all that, they move so fast. And so if you don't catch them on, I feel like I'm pretty plugged into pop culture, but there were definitely times where I was like, who are they talking about? But it's like by the time they had finished the joke, they had already made another joke that I did get. And so it was like I'd forgotten. But when you go back and you think about the concept sometimes, like you realize that the writing is really good. Like
Oh
I'm
yeah.
still laughing, and I was laughing today just thinking about it. I was sitting and thinking about the idea of a pronunciation bee, which was like the second episode. Like
Right.
that just like it didn't hit me when I was watching it, and I started thinking about how hilarious of an idea that is, like a pronunciation bee.
Right.
And it's just like things like that that just come back from the show that you're like, wait a minute, like somebody wrote that, and it's great, it's fantastic.
Sure. Yeah. 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 It really is. Like, can you use it in a sentence? No, because then I would be pronouncing it. Yeah. I want to talk about some of the other characters. So, I mean, obviously, we have a really, really great cast here. So we talked about Corvo, previously voiced by Justin Roiland, now being voiced by Dan Stevens. But we also have the character of Terry, voiced by Thomas Middleditch, who my only real exposure to him prior to this was the role he played in Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
which
me
is
too.
a very different role. He's much more meek and reserved, whereas Terry is just he's the total hedonist. Like he's
Yeah.
loving humanity. Like Corvo hates humanity, and Terry's just taking it all in. And then you've got the replicants, the kids in this. It is worth mentioning, like Solar Opposites. It's kind of taking the model of The Odd Couple, but very loosely taking that and just and for those not indoctrinated, The Odd Couple is basically that classic sitcom scenario where you have a highly organized kind of type A personality meets a carefree and spontaneous more type B personality, and they're thrust in a living situation together, and shenanigans ensue. So
Yeah.
yeah. So you've got Sean Jambroni voicing Yumulak, the replicant who is responsible for the creation of the wall. Anytime a human does him wrong, he shrinks them down and puts them in this wall. And then you've got Jessie being voiced by Mary Mack. I'm not as familiar with her, but apparently she's a comedian that's been around for a long time. So are there any like standouts for you? Do you find a member of this family that you kind of like look forward to their storylines, or you find them particularly funny, or what have you?
Yeah, I love Terry
Yeah.
because I feel like he fits he glues all of the situations together, and he
Okay.
glues a lot of the family together to me,
Sure.
just from like the polar side of Corvo being so serious and just like so angry and so just like a powder keg at all times, and then
Right.
to have just somebody so unserious is just like really funny. And the idea
Yeah.
of like the shirts are just like iconic. Like every episode,
Oh
like
yeah. Good
shirt
call.
just being something ridiculous that some kind of like ridiculous joke that's like a pop culture reference or whatever.
Sure.
Like that, I love that. That was something they've been doing ever since the first episode. It's just
Mm-hmm.
having him in some kind of ridiculous T-shirt, like every episode that just says something funny.
Right.
So I love that idea. They even make reference to the development of the characters with, I mean, it's a very meta show, right? I mean, like Yubulak at one point even says something like, well, you got to do this because you're a more developed character than me. Like, and that stood out to me because I was like, yeah, she is. Like,
Yeah.
you're not really that developed at all. But the fact that they called it is hilarious.
Right.
And like the reusing of the chase scene, like in that one episode, I don't even remember what episode, and they were like, are you reusing a chase scene from season 1 to try to save money? Like, so stuff like that, like, I love the idea that they're looking back on characters that maybe they haven't really super developed, but they can play with that and they can joke about it. To me, I love the two of the characters that just really popped this season was the pupa one, because he always has like a really funny adventure episode every season. Like I'm thinking back to the one where he slices the football kicker's leg so he can like kick open the vending machine to get the candy or whatever. Like that was an entire episode. Like it took him an entire episode to do that. And then in this episode, you had two things. You had the thing where he was trying to go on the rescue mission in the ship, and he was trying to save the UPS driver, and then you found out it was just because he wanted a package, like some kind of toy or something that was in a package, and that was a whole episode. And then you had the whole subplot of him trying to or basically like making this lady feel bad by basically doing the Raven but saying Cocomelon at her and making her go crazy. So like I love that. Like he's such a fun character because he's a kid. There's still something I think about all the time that he said is either last season or the season before,
Okay.
where it just hits me all the time, and it's funny, is whenever the girl is leaving the wall for the first time, and she runs into
Okay.
the pupa, and she tells him this whole like emotional thing about why she has to leave the wall and please don't kill me and all this type of stuff, and he
Right.
just goes, I like Lightning McQueen, and that's all he says. And like that hits me sometimes, because like I have kids, and that's what they literally do. That like
Oh,
you'll tell
right.
them something so serious, you're having such a serious conversation with them,
Right.
and then to say something like I like Lightning McQueen, like that's
Yeah.
so funny. And then past the pupa, like I love what they did with Aisha this season too.
Oh,
Like
right.
taking a character who has always just been a computer, who
Uh-huh.
just kind of like does computer things, and it's funny because she's like real
Sure.
sassy and all that. But to
Yeah.
take her on an episode and develop into this idea of like sending her on a date, like she wants to find love, like she's looking for connection, and like having that whole subplot, like I loved that idea of taking that side character who has
Right.
always just kind of been somebody who pops in and says a couple funny things and then disappears for 3 episodes,
Right.
and kind of devoting a lot more of the real estate of the show to developing her. So
Mm-hmm.
that really stood out to me, with some of these like smaller characters getting
Yeah.
their moment to shine a little bit.
Yeah. 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 And Aisha, the ship's like AI, is voiced by Tiffany Haddish. So yeah, she definitely had a lot more to do this season. And that does make me think about, you talk about how like Yumulak points out the fact that like he's lacking character development. The show is very self-aware and like and it points out the things that they're doing to like I remember, I think it was like last season or maybe the second season, where Terry says something like the solar opposites are going on vacation, or it's a road trip episode, or whatever. So um, keeping in mind that Aisha is kind of like tied to the ship, it might have been the last episode of the season, actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think it is. But the fact that like they've been stranded on Earth has been such a integral part of the show, and we find out that the ship has been repaired for like the better part of 4 months, and they just yeah. So
The commitment to just get weird with what the Schlorpians can do too is
yeah.
great. Like they're
Uh-huh.
all of a sudden they'll just decide that the Schlorpians have this like weird anatomy thing, and they'll just that'll be the episode. So like in this season, it was the whole Jesse and Yumulak having the elbow thing where their elbows were like getting all weird and stuff at the I think it was in maybe
yeah.
the first episode. Like
Right.
so that was completely out of nowhere. You have the whole thing of them transforming into humans because it's like a nervous response system. You have the thing with Jesse like basically going through puberty and having like a flower spurt out of her hair like 2 seasons ago, and being like, so it's like every once in a while they'll just be like, all right, the Schlorpians have something really strange. Like that's where the whole Goobler thing came from. Like they get stressed out and they create creatures like stress.
Right.
So I really like just that deepening of lore that they're constantly doing. You think about us, like our anatomy would be weird to someone with no background, right? So like you think about an alien species, their anatomy is just crazy to us. But I do like the idea of just constantly exploring that and bringing something just absurd out into the limelight every few episodes, and then just constantly carrying it through multiple seasons.
Yeah. The Gooblers especially are, I especially like those. And historically, we had only seen like Gooblers emerge when somebody was like stressed or panicking. But we had the great episode this season, the Super Gooblers, where we found like any strong emotion that gets repressed, we will see, the emergence of a Super Goobler. And Terry has a whole cavalcade of like, so as much as he's like the happy-go-lucky character, he clearly has some stuff going on. And then Yumulak's got that, sex crazed one, which is, fitting with his character. He's definitely the horny teenage kid. But then Jessie does get some real development with her repressed anger and her Goobler kind of, becoming such a problem. And again, the show being, as self-aware as it is, they point out that like Corvo and Jessie don't really have much of a relationship, and they never had a story together. And as they're like exploring that, they're effectively having a story together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and the other thing that kind of comes to mind when you're talking about that, you did mention the flower sprouting out of Jessie's head, but they frequently bring up the fact that they're like plant-based beings.
Yeah.
So it's pretty wild.
Literally the end of the season was them turning into trees, and you're just like, because you thought that they were going to die, and then they turned into a tree, and you're like, I guess this is how they're going to explain it. Okay. And then they just never talked about it again.
Yeah. And it wasn't this season. I think it might have been last season, but they talk about at the introduction how planet Schlorp was a utopia, and this asteroid hit. So all these Schlorpians went out into the galaxy and had to find new homes. But we find out that this has happened like over and over and over again, to the point that like Schlorpians are actually like being hunted by the Silver Cops for basically just killing countless planets and species. Yeah. So I do want to talk about some of like the guest stars we've had. So we mentioned Tiffany Haddish in the role of Aisha, and I think about Dan Stevens taking the role of Corvo, and had he not been put in this situation where he did have to take that role, I have to imagine it would have only been a matter of time before he joined the show. Like if he was, I don't know how that all went down, but if he was like a fan of the show and like asked to be a part of it or something like that. But they've gotten some incredible talent, like Alfred Molina, like appearing as the Duke, the despot ruling over the wall in the first couple of seasons. Sterling K. Brown making a turn as one of the denizens of the wall. So I'm trying to think if any other ones come to mind.
I believe I can't remember her name, but Pesley's mom, like the redhead in the wall, is voiced
Sherry.
by Christina Hendricks.
Yeah, Sherry.
So she's just a solid voice actor in anything that she's in. So
yeah, definitely.
She voiced the hive mind from the hive mind episode of Rick and Morty, which is Unity, which is like one of my favorite Rick and Morty episodes.
Call. Yeah,
so she was the voice of Unity and just brought so much life to that character. So she's great.
Yeah. I know there are countless other ones, but they're just not coming to mind. I mean, Kieran Culkin, as we mentioned, being the voice of Glenn. Oh, and that episode that he had, like, so I do appreciate like that the show is willing to like, they have episodes where it's like, we're not even going to deal with the Schlorpians right now. We're going to have a whole episode devoted to Glenn and his space adventures, or a whole episode devoted to the wall. So with Glenn, there was that episode where he was on this planet with like a class battle going on. But I know Skylar Gisondo voiced one of those, I think they were called like holocons or something like that. The people with holograms in their chest. And then David Diggs was actually like the main one that Glenn had this budding friendship with. So yeah. Talent all around. And I guess on that note, to speak to some of the talent kind of behind the scenes, like Rick and Morty, has been celebrated for being a collaboration between Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland. But Solar Opposites was a collaboration between Justin Roiland and Mike McMahon, who I had to do a little bit of research to be more familiar with him, but he's had a pretty storied career in animation. He worked on shows like South Park. He was initially a writer on Rick and Morty. He went on to create Star Trek Lower Decks, which I have not watched, but I've heard great things about. So I did notice, like in this fourth season, they made it a point not to have Justin Roiland's name featured. Like I think before, like when the Solar Opposites title card came up, it was there. But now they just omitted it entirely, and I'm like, I don't know if that's fair to Mike McMahon or not. But.
Yeah. You can. I did wonder, like, if we were going to see a shift at all in tone from the Roiland departure, but it really does seem like, to me, I didn't feel like it missed too many beats.
No, I agree. Yeah, and in a lot of ways, and it could be just the fact that the show's been going on for 4 seasons now. They have the ability to go back and make these callbacks, but I felt like this season really did like pull something, at least one thing from every single season that's come before. Like we got to see the Wood City again. That was a result of them transforming an entire city into these people that are made out of woods and everything like that. You have Daft Trunk.
It's like I totally forgot about that until you said that.
Yeah, and then one of my favorite episodes, I think it was in the first season, but they had Fun Bucket, this character that was like Chuck E. Cheese or something like that they really liked, and they made him real, and he went on to reject them. But they make references like, we can use the same Ray that we used to create Fun Bucket to create this dinosaur that's going to be the family pet. What do we find out? They all want to kill the family pet, and the family pet wants
and then
to kill
that
them.
led, like, it's just, you start to put the pieces together. It's like that led to the Stockiverse, which I thought was so hilarious. Like I thought that was such a hilarious subplot of this, and it's so creative and interesting, and just, to me, like I think it's one of the best animated shows on right now. Like in terms
Sure.
of comedy, I mean, I think um, there's certainly things that it could improve on and it could do a little bit better. But like, I
Sure.
think when you add them all up, I think it's one of the most just if you're looking for something that just takes itself not super seriously, but knows what it is and leans into what it is, and is just really smart and funny. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what I'd put. I mean, I'd put Rick and Morty up there with it at its
Sure.
best. But like I think it's right up there with some of the best animated stuff that's out there right now.
Yeah. I would agree.
One thing I do wish I'd like to see from it, which I don't know if it is this show, is the thing. Like, I
Okay.
don't know if it's really wanting to be this on any level, but
Sure.
I do see when it tries to take an emotional beat every once in a while, and I think it does sort of succeed, like in a sitcom way, right? Where
Okay.
it's like kind of teaching a lesson at the end. Maybe it's like teaching a lesson about family or something like that, and you can
Hmm.
kind of see where they're going with it. But I still feel like it is missing just like an occasional, like really impactful emotional beat, like a
Okay.
development for the character. And again, it's like, it's not that kind of show, but I think it can be like
Yeah.
Rick and Morty, like for example, like Rick and Morty is not that show in 95% of its run, but every
Right.
once in a while it'll hit an emotional beat that sticks with you. So like the episode we mentioned earlier about the hive mind with Unity, like the end of that episode, that's one of the most powerful scenes in the whole show, I think.
Yeah.
Where he's like depressed and he,
Yeah.
sticks his head under the ray and then
Yeah.
passes out, all of that. Like you have the scene where he switches Beth and her clone, like,
Right.
and that's, and says like he's a terrible father and all this stuff.
Right.
Like that's a really hard hitting
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
And then the episode where the guy dies that was sitting on his toilet that he had like declared war on, and it affected him deeply. Like he was so upset and deeply
Yeah.
hurt because it was this one person that he had connected with, even though he
Right.
hated him. He
Yeah.
didn't. He loved him.
He
And so
felt
he's sitting
something.
on that
Yeah.
toilet, and it's like
Yeah.
he's got his own hologram calling him the loneliest, most pathetic man in the universe. And you can tell, like, so those emotional beats, they're rare, but
Yeah.
they nail it. Like every time
Yeah.
they try to nail it, they do. And I
Yeah.
really want to see that in this show. Like, I
Sure.
don't want to see it all the time,
Sure.
but I want to see it just like once a season or something. Like, you just make me like, you just crush me about like Terry,
Yeah.
or you like
Okay.
crush me about Corvo. Like you give me
Okay.
something just deeply emotional. Like, I
Okay.
think it would help me connect a lot more with
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
characters, and I already feel connected to them. But
Yeah.
I think that to me, I do kind of want to see that a little bit.
Sure. Sure. No, I think you're spot on. If there was anything that the show rather kind of has a shortcoming with, I would agree. And when you started talking about these emotional beats, my head went to the same space that episode with Rick at the end of the Unity episode. Just how like that really like sat with me, and like it was something I reflected on and thought about after the episode. And I can't say I've really done that with Solar Opposites to the same extent. And even some of the other shows I brought up, like Futurama, has certainly had some episodes like that where it really strikes an emotional chord. And I guess thinking about this show, I think the best avenue it has to do that, and probably the closest it's come so far, is with the wall subplot.
Yeah,
Just
for sure.
having these people that had regular lives, and one little slight wound them up in
Yeah.
this dystopia. But I think about in the first season, we had the character of Tim, who was our protagonist, like going up against the Duke, and then we see him become the villain, and he becomes, the ruler of this wall. But in the third season, I believe it was, he had this whole like fever dream where he thought, he's making things right, and then it turns out it was just the results of lead poisoning from this collectible cup he had been drinking out of. So I think that's probably the closest, because I do remember when we got that revelation, it was just like, oh wow, it was kind of crazy to watch this character that we were really rooting for, just like him have this such an unfortunate end.
Yeah. And that's what they do. So we've kind of said it before, but they do such interesting things with taking characters that in any other show would be a minor throwaway character, and just developing them and getting to the point where they're almost developing them like for the joke. Like they're developing them so much over seasons. Like again, like what we said about, this is a guy that, was a complete throwaway in a subplot. They shot a bullet up into the air and it happened to fall into this guy's foot, and he was just this normal, average, just like douchey guy. They shot him into space, but we've been with him for over a season now,
Yeah.
and we're heavily invested in what happened to him. And
Right.
and so it's like, to me, like, that type of commitment to the development, it shows me that they know how to develop characters,
Sure.
like that's
Sure.
there. Like they can
Yeah.
bring depth to these characters and stories to these characters. I mean, they've
Hmm.
proven that.
Yeah.
But I think it's just, how are they going to continue to do that? Like I know a
Sure.
season 5 is coming, but is that the end? And it's like,
Yeah.
are we seeing more seasons of this? Like how deep are we going to go on some of these characters?
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's a great point. And I'm glad you mentioned the fact that we do know that we have a season 5 on the way. I think it was um, confirmed back in like October of 2022. So I kind of find myself, hoping that what you brought up about the audience reception to this season with Dan Stevens stepping into the role, that hopefully that doesn't negatively impact the show too much, because I really look forward, even having just finished season 4, I'm already looking forward to season 5 and the places they could go with it, because this season like left off with them still being human. They look like they're taking the right course to correct that. But I just have to imagine, similar to the way previous seasons have picked up right where the last one left off. Like this season, we had Corvo and Terry working the boring job, like the boring corporate job, because they had to do it for the good of the pupa, and they abandoned that after episode 2. But I would still like to see that thread picked up. But
Yeah.
I don't think we need to be too long winded on this episode. But did you have anything else you wanted to bring up about the show before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I don't have anything else to add. I mean, I'm really excited about this show. I
Yeah,
hope that we get more past season 5. This is a show that I think could theoretically run for a long time, like Rick and Morty has.
sure.
I do wonder if the backlash that we're seeing from Solar Opposites, with the review bombing and just the really negative takes that are online about the voice and all of that, and people just immediately being done because of the voice, like not even giving it a chance. I do wonder
Right.
if we'll see a similar reaction with Rick and Morty when it starts in October,
Oh, cool.
or
Yeah.
If I don't know if people are getting it out of their system now or whatever, but
Right.
it does seem to be a lightning rod, kind of, at least online. But I personally, I feel like I got over the voice. I feel like I got into it, and I feel like by the end I was embracing it.
Sure.
And I'm excited for another season. I think the places, the storylines that the show could go, the fact that we have these 3 concurrent storylines that I'm really invested in different ways in all of them. I'm invested in just the craziness and the sci-fi craziness of the Schlorpians and all
Yeah.
of that. I'm invested in just the drama and the politics and like the Game of Thrones of it all, of the wall. And I'm really invested in this whole
Sure.
story of the Silvercops, and they're all in different ways. So
Yeah.
to me, just watching these stories kind of take these different branches, all playing around each other, I'm really excited for the future of this show, and I'm excited to watch Rick and Morty and watch this and kind of see
Hmm.
how they're adapting to this, not reboot, but just kind of refreshed. Like we're kind of moving on from the old guard. We're kind of embracing some new writers. We're
Hmm.
trying to see if we can put our own new type of spin on it.
Sure.
I mean, we weren't in those rooms. We don't know anything about Justin Roiland, but it does seem like, all the legal stuff aside, it does seem like a lot of people kind of had an issue with working with him just as a
Hmm.
professional. I mean, it seems like a lot of things came out about just having to feel like while he was talented in many ways, that people
Right.
did feel like he maybe was kind of dragging down a little bit of the writing of the show and the direction of
Right.
the show. So I think you can feel a little bit of renewed energy in Solar Opposites. I mean, I felt like I
Hmm.
felt a bit of renewed energy in this season,
Right.
and I am kind of anticipating that that'll be true of Rick and Morty too. That there will feel like there's a little bit of fresh energy around it.
Yeah. Yeah. We can hope.
Yeah.
But I generally share your optimism for the future of both shows. So on that note, I guess we will wrap things up here. So thank you again for making your debut on Animation Deliberation. Do you want to let the people know what else you have going on and where else they can find you?
Yeah, I am on Multiverse News with you.
Yes.
We record on Tuesday nights, and those episodes drop on Wednesday, where we talk about entertainment news, and that's always a fun show. So you can catch me over there if you're into geek culture and entertainment news and movies and TV shows. You can kind of come join in those conversations with us. And then I'm also on Commute, the podcast, which is a weekly educational show. It's only about 20 minutes long. It drops on Monday mornings. And me and my co-host Dave, we run through 3 interesting topics in about 20 minutes to try to teach you something just like water cooler stuff on your way to work, stuff you can bring up with people and talk about, and have interesting things to go over with other people. So you can find me in both those places, Multiverse News and Commute, the podcast.
Right on. Yeah, I just kind of have to take a moment to sing the praises of Commute. It's really good, and just the production value that's there and the amount of work that clearly goes in the show. You guys run a tight ship, and like I started listening to podcasts because of a 45-minute commute in Southern California traffic, and I just got so frustrated because I like to listen to talk radio, but there was always so many ads. So the fact that you've crafted a show that like you said, it teaches you something and gives you these like random facts and little tidbits that you can bring up in conversation and kind of be, the educated one at a cocktail party or what have you. So if any of our listeners haven't checked out Commute the podcast, please do that. And if you haven't listened to Multiverse News, I'm extremely disappointed in you. Do that now. I'm just kidding. If you like what we're doing here, I just ask that you like the show, share the show, leave us a review. You can always hit us up on any of our social medias. Find us at Animation Deliberation. And if you want to send us an email, animationdeliberationpodcast@gmail.com. And thank you for the support, and keep tuning in. That's TOONIN.
Thank you for listening to the Animation Deliberation Podcast, a proud member of the Stranded Panda Network. If you would like to contact us, you can email animationdeliberationpodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter @animationdelib1. For this and other great shows, you can visit strandedpanda.com or join the great community that is the Stranded Panda Chat Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/svchat. Tune in next time, and remember, stay whelmed.